So thank you very much to you all. It's a nice stage here, isn't it? We've got everybody
Yeah.
around us. So don't worry about having backs. We've got the big screens which will show everything. And we discussed a little bit out of there, so we've had a nice chat about this area. We're going to start with some nice questions and open them to all of you so we can have a nice discussion and really get things going. So I'm going to start with first question. Over the past few years, the level of government interest in entrepreneurship and startup development has increased. How would you describe the interplay between government and the private sector in trying to shape the startup ecosystem in your country? And we'll start first of you with Huld.
I think we have an excellent play between government and the private sector. I think, though, that government has had the tendency to want to manage the system instead of facilitating it. And I think we're moving closer and closer to the private sector coming in stronger and stronger. And I think that's a very positive change, for us at least.
Paul, what in your country would you
I
anything
think
to add?
I like to see myself more as a facilitator than a manager of the ecosystem. It's definitely been very important that we were very active in the ecosystem. I mean, definitely giving money to new startups, to incubators. I mean, we've stopped giving money to incubators now because there's more than enough, just as there is. So I definitely would like to move more into just helping, being a supporter, much more than being very active in them. And then we'll work with the companies, but the ecosystem is definitely growing. It has grown a lot lately.
Excellent. And Charles, anything to add?
Yeah, we actually see ourselves as a promoter of the ecosystem and also a facilitator. So we work with, and our role is changing all the time because the ecosystem is changing and growing. So we work increasingly now, not only with the private sector, of course, trying to attract them to put a base in Hong Kong and to leverage on the opportunities there in the region as well, but also working with the corporates, the investors, the academia, as well as what we call the various Hong Kong Inc. members, the Science Park and the Cyberport and all the other platforms, innovation labs, accelerator programs, incubation programs, and most importantly, the industries that are really interested in terms of corporate innovation and investors looking at supporting the whole ecosystem. So you have a whole host of these stakeholders that we work with across different industries.
Absolutely. So as you said, there's facilitation, which is quite important, isn't it? We're going to talk a little bit later about how, interestingly, when I spoke to you earlier, how all of your countries are actually collaborating and working together, but we'll come to that in just a moment. Public policies to foster entrepreneurship and innovation often tend to capitalise on existing strength of the economy and build an ecosystem on local conditions. Was this the case in your countries too? Again, we'll start with you, Huld.
Yeah, in Iceland, that's definitely the case. We have strengths in certain industries which are based on our economy, which is a resource-based economy. And obviously, being an island in the Atlantic Ocean, our fishing industry is very strong. So we see a lot of innovation coming from there. We also have strong links in green energy and energy-heavy production. But in the last 10 years, probably, tourism has become by far the biggest industry.
Really?
So we do see a lot of innovation there, which is good, great. And we're very happy for all the people that want to come and see our beautiful country. But we definitely see that the companies that come to us, at least, to the investment fund that I work for, most of them come from these kinds of backgrounds.
Yeah.
So yes, there's a very strong link in that area.
Okay. Now let's talk about the population then in your country. How many are we talking? Because it's not a lot, is it?
No, we have just under 360,000 people.
Gosh, right. So very small. Let's go over to Norway, where we're talking over 5
It's huge. We're over,
Yes.
over 5 million people.
Yes. So how does it differ then in terms of how Norway approaches things in that area?
Well, actually, whether or not we choose some of the, I mean, we can go into anything from Innovation Norway, and we might want to say, well, let's focus where we're good. But that's actually been like a quite hot political issue. They want us to go very broad, whereas we say, well, just like the EU, we might set up some missions. So I think what we have done is really to put a sustainability hat on everything, saying, oh, if it's sustainable, we will get into it. And we will support it and help it grow. So it's definitely, sustainability is the most important for us now.
Okay, Charles, would you add anything to that? What's the state of play?
Yeah, it's quite interesting because Hong Kong, well, population-wise, we have 7.3 million people. And actually, we're working with this area which is called the Greater Bay Area, which is like 70 million people, so 10 times the population of Hong Kong. And usually when people come to Hong Kong, they're looking for four things. They're looking for funding, they're looking for ideation to commercialization, they're looking for new markets potential, marketplace, and as well as for talent. So we've changed our kind of focus in a way, changing because we're kind of following what the trend is up to. So Hong Kong's economy was built by traditional economic pillars like financial services, trading, supply chain logistics, and tourism. And because of the fact that now we have everything, that there's a big thrust and focus on financial technology, fintech, we're seeing a very big focus on smart city, health tech, and AI and robotics. Now, these are the kind of the core areas we're kind of focusing on, and because of the fact, not because the government is saying that we should do that, it's because the private sector, it's very much a laissez-faire, bottoms-up approach. So there's a big demand, and we believe that Hong Kong has a lot of advantage to really support companies in these areas. Very interestingly, in the last, I would say, 18 months, we've seen a number of development in the traditional sectors, I mentioned earlier. So they all come up with property tech, or they add, food tech or education technology. So there's a tech element to logistics and so on and so forth. So the traditional sectors are coming up with these new innovations and adding this tech element to it. So we have the traditional sectors with the tech element, and then we have these new areas which I just mentioned earlier.
Okay, so we've touched upon sort of, the ecosystems in your own individual countries, rather. But of course, entrepreneurship relies on, dealing with other countries and attracting foreign investors, which is a kind of a key thing to talk about. Perhaps particularly in your case, Huld, would you agree with that, or what would you like to add? Your thoughts?
Yes, I would agree with that. It's hugely important for us, and if you have a startup in Iceland, you can. We have a tiny domestic market, and you always have to be outward looking and thinking. Otherwise, the market's not there, the people are not, the customers are not there. So in our criteria, for example, the outward looking, the export looking element is very strong, and it has to be. So, in terms of the team's language skills, Icelandic isn't going to take you very far. Yeah. And you have to be able to work in other countries and cooperate with others and get funding from other countries also.
So what would you say was the USP of your ecosystem then to foreign startups?
I think, we have, the economy is flexible, if you like. We have a very flexible, highly educated labor force. We have government incentives, and we have, I think in many ways, a can-do culture of willingness and resilience. So, and I think it's also important nowadays, in personal opinion, in that, the standard of living is high, yeah. Gender equality is high, it's a family-friendly, you can do all your personal sports and outdoor activities, and all these things matter today. And I think we have an abundance of that.
So that's Finland for you. Let's move on to Norway then. What would you say was your USP then in attracting foreign investment?
Well, I definitely think we have many of the same as Iceland, and labor is cheap. I mean, good labor, high technically skilled people, very cheap in Norway compared to, for instance, in the US, where it's getting crazy. So that means that even if we take Norwegian companies abroad, and many of them are sold abroad, most of the companies keep having their R&D and technical development left in Norway. So I think it might surprise a lot of people that Norway has cheap labor, but it actually does. It's an expensive country, but it's the level of the labor or of the everybody's paid more or less the same. So that means the technical do not go skyrockets like the other ones in other countries.
Okay, very interesting. And Charles, what about yourself in Hong Kong? What's most attractive then, do you think, about the ecosystem in your country to foreign investors?
I think it's the availability, the scalability. We have a lot of, for B2B, business to business, and also business to consumer. We're just located, very luckily, 5 hours away from half the world's population. We have a lot of large corporations, SMEs, and startups that use Hong Kong to expand their business. So the government has been putting a lot of different initiatives to really foster that entrepreneurship and really attract these people. So for example, we have now a 2-tier tax profits mechanism, which is 8.25% tax for the first $2 million profit to encourage people to come in and replow the money that they earn into their business. We also have a number of incentives for research and development, and the end of this year, we're going to be announcing a series of initiatives that we're transforming Hong Kong into a global research center for universities, where we're attracting some of the best universities in the world to work with our universities to foster that entrepreneurship initiatives, and especially for ideation to commercialization. Because as you know, there's a lot of innovation actually coming out of Asia, unlike where it was 20 years ago. So we are really sitting in the sweet spot where the innovation that people are looking at, especially for the last mile, as we call it, the ideation to commercialization. And this is where we are really strong at, and we have the availability for funding. The government is working very hard to really foster, bring up a new incentives for people to do that, doubling the percentage from to 1.5% of our GDP into research. So a lot of interesting ideation to commercialization, but also distribution and the marketplace. And I think the access to funding also is very important. This is where we, I think, can complement with each other, because we have this ideation to commercialization and also access to market and access to funding, which is very important from pre-seed to all the way to IPO. And we are encouraging, we see a lot of family offices getting into that.
I mean, you might see the Norwegian market as a big disadvantage, but it actually might be an advantage sometimes to come from a small country. I know you probably feel the same, because all companies, I mean, when you start a company in Norway, you can't start your company for Norway. You have to be international from day one. So you might just say, you know what, we'll do everything in English. We need to speak English in the company because we need to take people from abroad. So in many ways, it might even be an advantage being 5 million people and not 80.
Absolutely. Anything to add on that before we
I completely agree with that.
Well, you would do, wouldn't you? I like it. It's really interesting to get all of the different sort of ways that you told us there about. It's almost like a sales pitch there. I was impressed with all of you. But let's talk about something we have touched upon, is collaboration and synergy between different countries. So we've spoken about some of the strengths and weaknesses of each of the places that you've come from. Let's talk about collaboration. How is that happening at the moment?
I think, at least for the Nordic region, we have very strong collaboration, and within the Nordic countries, there is an entity called Nordic Innovation, and you know, we were joking earlier that we've seen each other 3 times in 2 months, and we'll see each other again next month, and so it sort of gives an idea of how much we actually cooperate between the Nordic countries. And I think that's fantastic. We draw from each other's strengths, we're helping each other, we're learning together, we do projects together. And I think it's hugely important, at least for us in the Nordics. And then we have extended that over to Hong Kong.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Nordic brand is good. I mean, people see when they hear about the Nordic countries, most people see something positive with that. If we would be saying that, no, I'm not Nordic, I'm Norwegian or I'm Swedish, I mean, to most of the world, that's all the same. So we just use that as an advantage as well, saying, I mean, no, we are the Nordic community in Silicon Valley, in Hong Kong, in Singapore. Come and join us. And when they speak with Norwegian, Swedes, Danes, or Icelandic people, it doesn't matter to them, so why should it matter to us? So,
like you say, strengthening.
I completely agree with this about collaboration, because I think that collaboration is really key. I mean, without collaboration, there's no, as you mentioned, startups, even to Hong Kong, we're a small market of 7.3 million people. So people have to start thinking globally from day one when they start. And it's all about collaboration. So we are really in full force, wanting to roll out the red carpet to collaborate with other stakeholders. And we're very pleased to know that I think that the Nordic Innovation House you mentioned earlier is a prime example of collaboration where you have 5 governments collaborating together to form this platform. And now they're into different ecosystems like Silicon Valley, New York, Hong Kong, and Singapore. And we're very pleased to do that because we believe that whether it is funding, whether it is for ideation to commercialization, and we each play a different part. So there are a lot of very interesting innovation and research coming out of your countries, and where Hong Kong, I think the role we can play is the ideation to bring those ideas to fruition, to real actual businesses, and to scale them, and to fund them as well. So I think that collaboration is really not only important but essential.
Absolutely.
I think in the way we do things.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better myself. Okay, let's move on to some individual questions then to sort of really find out a little bit more about what's happening in your respective countries. We'll start with you, Paul.
Yep.
Now, we mentioned before, Norwegian market offers access to around 5.3 million people. So it's really important for you to expand to foreign markets for the next stage growth. What's the role of Innovation Norway, which is the organisation that you work for, in the internalisation of Norwegian startups?
I think the role we have for getting them out of the country is really the same role we try to do in everything. I mean, we want to push them without being the ones who makes the decision, or we don't want to push them too early. I mean, it's a little bit like with capital. I mean, we want to fund them if necessary. If our money could help more private investors getting in, that's good. If our money makes them not look for investors or to become a too expensive company, that's not good. Just the same for going international. I mean, we want to say, tell them, you know what, Norway is such a small market, you have to go abroad. Then we use global entrepreneurship, I mean, the programs that would take them to, for instance, those international houses, the Nordic houses around, and give them like a good feel about what would it take to make it in New York. And they all get home understanding that Norway is a very small, safe market, that they need to do their homework before going out. So I think we use them more to just push them out early, a safe haven outside, just to tell them really, this is what you need to do.
Awesome. Now, Norway is known for its energy industries, which brings a lot of wealth, but it also ties up a lot of engineering and technology talent. Do you see many Norwegian startups struggling to recruit skilled people? And if so, how do you tackle this barrier to growth?
I think our whole ecosystem started growing 3 years ago, and that was because of the oil prices. Of course, when the oil price goes from 100 to 40, the entire country understands that we need to start looking for other ways of income, which many would say we need anyway, with the sustainability hat on. But that makes the whole country see we need to look for other ways to get funded. We need more people to work with startups. We need more people to be investing in startups. The whole community comes together saying, let's do this. Now, unfortunately, the price is up to 70 again, so a lot of the people are getting back a little bit, or we see a little fewer startups now, unfortunately. Now we face the scale-ups. How to get people in and out of those, it's very relevant with energy companies and how the prices are. But we're looking everywhere for people to get into Norway and trying to get the best to join the Norwegian startups because we need them to grow fast.
Excellent. Thank you, Paul. Let's move on to you, Huld. The New Business Venture Fund is a state-owned investment fund that primarily invests in seed and early stage startups. You see a lot of deal flow coming out of Icelandic universities.
We have seen it. It has slowed down somewhat, but we're hoping that with some changes that are being made in the support system and the support network, for example, the support network in Iceland has opened up a new tech transfer office, so we hope that that will help and encourage the universities and staff and students to bring more ideas to forward. We know that they have a lot of ideas and there's a lot going on, and you know, the innovation scene in the universities and colleges is flourishing, so it's there. The difficulty we see, for example, is that you know, we're an evergreen fund, so we've invested in many of these companies, but we see that other funds which have a time limit are resistant to doing that, primarily because the time that they need is longer than most of the VCs have.
Sure.
So that's an issue, I would say. But the ideas are there. It's a question of putting together the network to assist them and help them.
Of course. The VC market, you mentioned it slightly there, it's comparatively small in Iceland. Though adequate for the size of the country, does it still pose a bigger problem for rounds at later stages? And if so, do you facilitate cross-border dealings in your role or within your organisation? How does that work?
Yes, I would say that you know, we probably have adequate funding, although you could always argue that, you know, more money would be better. But I think at a later stage, we would like to see other funds that are able to contribute and move the companies further. We do help them finding funds in other countries and investments in other countries. But we also think that there is, we've participated, for example, in Nordic cooperation, which is called Nordic Scalers. And part of that program is to assist companies once they've reached a certain size to move forward. And I think that's it's been an excellent project and run by Nordic Innovation. And I think it's a good way of working together and assisting the companies how to move forward, because all of us, you know, at least in this region, the Nordic region, have to be outward looking, as we've all said. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, Charles, we'll move on to you now. Hong Kong already has a very strong startup ecosystem. You discussed some of the reasons why a bit earlier. Things like excellent infrastructure, pro-business policies and strategic location. But what's the next step for Hong Kong? The big question, but can you give us some insight?
Basically, we because of the fact that we have all these ingredients for the startups and scale-ups to succeed, we're reaching out basically to different countries around the world to create, I think the Nordic Innovation House was an inspiration, and we see more and more other countries coming to us and said, we want to do the same thing. We have people in our country that are looking for funding, like ideation to commercialization, leveraging on what Hong Kong is offering, Shenzhen next door, and the manufacturing hub. So basically bringing, you know, the financial center, innovation center, and manufacturing, smart manufacturing together. So how can we do that? So the next step for us is really to bring these ecosystem partners together into Hong Kong. And I think that by doing that, it will actually benefit a lot of these ecosystems, such as the Nordic Innovation House, because they're also looking for potential partners. There's no one country today in the world where you have only people, smart people. You have people, different things, and different startups from different countries are looking for solutions for their home problems. And I think by having this kind of global ecosystems kind of synergies, that synergy is really second to none. Yeah. And we see that when the collaboration amongst them is really magical. And that's what we're trying to do, to bring in different ecosystems which are very vibrant on their own right, having a base, a kind of a home away from home, in Hong Kong where they can collaborate, and where our startups and scale-ups also can go to their countries and grow into their system, because there's this, as I said, we're a small market. It's not just China, it's not just Southeast Asia, but Europe and the Nordics are very important markets as well. So this kind of collaboration is very important, and we see that as our big thing.
Sure. You mentioned their collaboration. It's become a buzzword for us here. But what are the challenges sometimes about working with different countries? You've got different ecosystems, different cultures, different views and opinions on things. I'm sure this is a very big question to answer, but in your experiences, what have the main barriers been in sort of making things happen and come together?
Innovation is running 1,000 miles an hour, and the systems, policies always catching up. And I think that when we work with different ecosystems, one of the things, if the innovation startup has come up with a solution, trying to implement the solution in certain markets would be difficult, it's challenging, because the policy is just not there. And I think that these are the things which are important. But I believe now every government is looking at solving some of these and lifting some of these barriers to making it happen.
I think funding and timing, is really the difficulty about knowing when to go out and start collaborating or start internationalization of your company. If you go too early, you're not going to find the market. You might as well stay home. If you go too late, it's too late. And do you have enough money to really go there and show that you exist? It's really, I think our embassies, our Innovation Norway offices around the world, that's our job really, to be rude sometimes and tell, you know what, you're not going to find an investor, you're not going to find a market here, just go home and do your homework. And sometimes we just say, you know what, your company is so great, you have to go out because someone else is going to do it if you don't. So it's really about the timing.
Anything you want to add on that?
I agree with the challenges is probably that the regulations and the laws are different, and they're always catching up, because the entrepreneurs are always one step ahead, which is great, and they should be.
Yes, absolutely.
But then there are also practical things like different currencies. Different ways of dealing with taxation and so on and so forth. So sometimes they're very basic things, but I think if the willingness to resolve these issues is there, it can easily be done.
Yeah, and the good news is, as I think you've said, is this is something that's very much on everybody's agenda, is how we actually tackle some of these issues and move it forward in that way. Sorry, go on, Charles.
I think the interesting thing about collaboration also is because we're doing a lot of cross-border experimentation. So we have these sandboxes where in a science park, or the regulators are working together with the innovators, and also the large corporates who are looking for these solutions, to working together and again finding solutions for these, because at the end of the day you can't work without any one of these players not collaborating. So having these sandboxes and having this cross-border experiment. So for example, in things like fintech, for example, where blockchain, we're talking about building the infrastructure, where it's not just benefiting Hong Kong or Asia, but also this collaboration with this infrastructure it is cross-border payment, cross-border currencies, cross-border blockchain for trade financing. And it's this kind of collaboration which will result into a real impactful win-win for both the investors and the startups, and of course the economies that we all are working for.
I couldn't have said it better myself. We're actually running out of time. It is a really interesting topic, and we could have covered this at real length, but I think what really shone for me today anyway is just how enthusiastic you all are, watching you talk out there already, swapping business cards, coming up with ideas. It's great to see that there are people like you at the helm making things happen in your countries, and of course collaboration, which is key, and the magic, as Charles said. Thank you very much for your time today. It's been really a pleasure to talk to you all. Please, round of applause please for our panellists.